Marhaba, Jordi Sancho, and I come from the University of Barcelona. And thank you for inviting me to this conference. This keynote has the name Technology and COVID in Society. Can we learn from our failures? Let's start. The public administration have been preparing for changing to digital services access and provision for the last decades. Some countries even developed strategies of digital-first services, both for economic reasons. Some studies say that the cost for an online service is about between 0.1 and 10% of the cost of a direct service providing. And also, it's good in terms of offering better services for the citizens' clients. Then COVID arrived, and in most of the countries of Europe, whole parts of the access and provision for basic services could not be offered in person. Those plans for digital services needed to become reality. And you know how the story goes. Spoiler alert, we failed miserably in important parts. In this keynote, I will present some ideas about the shift to online services in three basic areas: education, health, and social services. I will try to identify the pitfalls and the good practices that emerge in order to learn and improve them. We present preliminary results from a work that started with the project DigiCom, led by Professor Hakan Aydın. These findings come from a team that is formed also with my colleagues of the research at my university, Mariona Grané, Carles Lindín, and Núria Serrat. We present a qualitative approach focused on Catalonia, because the Catalan government has the competencies in education, in health, and in social services. But I'm sure that some of the issues, or most of the issues, probably may be similar in other parts and in other countries. In Spain and in Catalonia, we had a total lockout or total closure for several months. In Catalonia, all the schools and university closed their physical doors on March 13 of last year, and until September 2020, they remain closed. In our university, we have just started with normal lectures. During 43 days, all the children and young people of this country remain locked at home. We present the objectives of our research. We focus basically on identifying the main problems of access and use of basic digital resources and services related to four areas: family, social services, education, and health. And the second objective was to explore some recommendations in order to solve these problems. The methodology was based on a sample of experts of digital transformation and workers for these services, conducting 10 interviews with experts. 2 interviews were made with directors and assessors of educational services, 3 interviews with managers and direct workers of local social services, 1 interview with a manager of technology on a big hospital, and 4 interviews to university experts on the digital impact on these issues. We respect the confidentiality of participants, but we are able to show some results. I will explain first some problems we identified, some conflicts that we can discuss about, and finally some ideas that may be useful to work with them. Let's start with the problems. On families, starting with on families, digital services and social networks confront new problems inside families, as we know. Problems of taking too much time of your life in passive mode, or problems for cyberbullying, or receiving sexual harassment comments for just showing pictures on Instagram. There is a more control and more help approach that seems to be working, but it is difficult, it takes effort, and families adapt from different views. These different views can be explained better with a socioeconomic and cultural divide than a digital divide or age-based divide. These problems were increased a lot during COVID. We see that sometimes the less favored families and with children, and in some cases families with children with disabilities, are the ones with better hopes, are the ones that think that technologies will improve the life of their children. And then, just for the reason, they are more permissive. But they are centered only on instrumental view of the technologies. Just letting children use digital services all you want, they think, will contribute to good learning. On the other hand, usually, the families that receive the education, the families who assist to meetings and keynotes and digital education services for the children, are not the most needed. Just the opposite, normally. On social services, during the COVID, we have seen great variations of developments in administrations and localities in order to help citizens with the access to services. Sometimes big municipalities seem to have left workers on their own, and little municipalities may have done great efforts. The people we interview acknowledge that the problems for giving access to information and social services users rely on broken citizen attention services model. The costs have been terrible. Some people have been waiting for months without economic benefits, with no economic benefits at all, as with those with pensions, just because the normal claiming procedures have been interrupted. We have realized that we ask citizens to go to other administrations to take documents for us. This is costly and difficult for any citizen, but especially for vulnerable people. It's stupid. Why cannot we communicate directly with these other administrations? Then some people explain that there are existing resources to at least reduce this burden. For example, there are online services to check and share information between administration, but they are not commonly used, sometimes for a lack of skills from public workers. There are also online direct services to give access and process administrative procedures. Some of these services directly for users are easy, and some are very difficult to use. In any case, the logic of these services follow the administration logic, not the normal citizen's logic. In some cases, even the easiest systems can be impossible to use for an old person. With these problems, social services staff used everyday tools in social services, like WhatsApp, or like low-tech solutions, like telephone, or just using one person to do the online processing with the client in front. These are for good use as emergency solutions, easy to prepare and common to use. But these tools are not adequate for a normal working. And answering or using these tools created a reaction way of working that was not especially useful for social workers or for citizens. The problems on education highlighted by the interviewed people were, first of all, the problems that were or seemed more important and difficult to solve. The lack of connected devices between families. This problem was solved after some time with third sector and local donations. And the lack of instrumental digital competencies from teachers, like using VLA, virtual learning environments for primary education teachers. These also were solved with some courses and resources put by the Catalan government. But the problems more difficult to solve were the didactic use of digital resources. Teachers focused on tools and instruments, how to use Moodle, how to use Zoom or whatever, and not in didactics or pedagogy. And for that reason, trying to translate direct or personal face-to-face lecture to the same lectures through Zoom or other video conference tools was not working. The other usual applications of VLA was based on industrial logic, creating homework by the teacher, offering the homework, revising the homework, creating the homework, offering the homework, revising the homework. It was like being on industry. It was not working so well. Most schools had no clear digital strategy. Sometimes students started with 4 different solutions from their teachers. Finally, both social services and educational staff explain that some families, normally the ones with the most risk of school dropout, just disappeared. And no channels, nothing was done to put them again at school. On health, hospital started some interesting applications, some interesting innovations, offering tablets and phones given by companies for people that were alone during the COVID in the hospital, improving medical assistance by video conferences in the cases that was not possible to access to the hospital to see a doctor, or creating an app that lets you know the process and where is your relative when they get into the emergency room. In primary care, also used direct consultation with your family doctor and with your nurse by email, by phone, etc. But the problems were very similar than the problems in the education and social services. First, usually these changes meet with resistance from doctors because it meant more work. As an example, they need to write on every step into the system so their relative can check online. So they need not to do the same thing, the same procedure at last, but during every time. Sometimes the resistance were because it meant to change the practice. And usually online systems were complicated for older people and sometimes even for young people, because the system, again, follows the logic of service production and departments, but not the usability for the citizen, or because the public services are so formally concerned about data uses that there are too many security checks. After seeing these problems, let's see some conflicts for the analysis. If we try to analyze in some abstraction these problems, we realize that, first of all, should we thinking on the digital divide or in terms of social inequality and social cohesion? It's not really a question of age, but it's a socioeconomic issue. As an example, the difference between people who can do teleworking and help their children while being at home and people who cannot do teleworking depends on the social position of jobs. And these emerge, and then emerge the risk of breaking social cohesion and increasing conflict within the society. The risk of social cohesion is clear and works in several levels or several layers. We better start talking about it rather than talk about the digital divide, because it has strong political, democratic, and social mobility effects, and we must do something about it. The social cohesion breaks when we lose the ability to analyze the information, when we fail to realize that our world is more diverse than the world of opinions we gather from our social networks. Networks that are defined by our homophilia on extreme, the trend to be surrounded by people with similar opinions on specific issues we value. The algorithms tend to promote people like us, to promote the contact with people like us. And it has effects on our tolerance and our ability to empathize. This promotes social polarization, reduces our ability to dialogue, and breaks our societies. The ability needed to analyze information, to discuss, to distinguish what is wrong and what is right, what society thinks, away from our Twitter feeds, is getting more difficult to achieve and more needed at the same time. That's one of the conflicts, one of the contradictions. Social inequality is linked to this risk of breaking social cohesion through the digital consumption. The second conflict is that access, use, and learning are not linear or even clear relations, but we act like that. We used to think that if we give people more access to devices, to smartphones, to tablets, to computers, people will increase the use, and it will improve their learning. But it's more complicated than that. We can increase the access, and the uses may be so specific and so unrelated to the learning processes that they may even reduce learning. We have been thinking a lot about what is learning. We have been thinking about it for decades, but we act differently. We act like nothing was work about it. As an example, one of the main concerns of teachers using online distance teaching during the pandemic was how to prevent students from cheating in exams. That was one of the main issues. We know it's not what we need, but we cannot stop worrying. Most teachers confronted with the reality that exams and essays are very easy to copy, instead of thinking what does it mean, what to do, we kept working on how to stop students to use existing content. Why? Because we feel insecure, probably. We may need to put learning first, and then digital access and digital use. It may help to focus in the needed aspects of the digital paradigm, but it's going to be more difficult. The third conflict is that the mantra "make more courses" may not be working to increase digital competencies. One of the problems highlighted before is a certain lack of digital competencies from teachers, from social workers, from doctors, from nurses. And it may seem that what it follows is if we need to develop these competencies, we just need to make more courses. And it does not seem right from all the people we interviewed. This is a very important one, and we saw it repeated constantly from both professionals and experts interviewed. They say, please stop offering courses and start requiring real uses and experiences. Education, social services, and general experts alike, they seem to confirm it. They say people are tired of making courses. Some say, but it's not working. On education, offering more courses on digital competence on teaching is not the solution. Too many years doing it and the results are disappointing. We may need different strategies for different centers and different groups with a clear application in the classroom. We need to demand to be put in practice. The fourth conflict is the conflict on working versus thinking. We cannot think, we have heard a lot, we cannot think because we cannot stop working. And that's a problem, they say, because we need to think for a better action. We have been in emergency mode for more than a year, and we need to finish this emergency mode. It's common on education, on health, and social services. Hearing, we cannot think because we cannot stop doing things. Now, after 1 year of acting in emergency mode, I think everyone realizes that we need to think. And that's good. But the risk now is not to be wrong or to make mistakes. The real risk is to turn on again on business as usual, to change again into normal mode in social services, in education, or in healthcare services. Interviewees highlight that some changes will rest here. Some changes need to be maintained. Then we need to use what happened as a precious experiment, an experiment that showed us what failed and what succeeded. For example, we need to start thinking globally in terms of a new model for citizen services. And finally, the third part is that there are some ideas that we may need to take into account. It's good to have more questions than answers. It's good to ignite discussions. I can highlight briefly some basic ideas that may be useful to swim in this brave sea of conflicts and contradictions. The first of all is thinking in terms of double loop learning. Okay, we failed on some crucial issues, but to learn from failures, we need to think in terms of second loop learning. That's a term, I think, coined by Chris Argyris, that he came from the fields of pedagogy, psychology, and organizational management. Single loop learning is knowing what failed. Double loop learning relates to knowing why it was not solved before. Again, single loop learning is knowing what failed. Double loop learning relates to knowing why this was not solved before, even when a lot of people knew it. We now know where are some of the problems. We have been discussing some of them, but we may need to ask why these problems are not solved yet, after decades of digital policies. That means that we may need to focus on resistance. If we do not address those elements, the defensive practice, the difficulties to manage the unknown situations, the fears, we will not change anything. We have enough demonstrations that even legal changes don't mean anything. I use sometimes the term of path dependence. We need to think about managing change, and it's not easy. We need to talk to politicians. We need them to think in terms of long or at least medium-term view and stop focusing on short-term goals. We have to acknowledge that some workers have also their agendas and they don't like to change. If we don't start with the resistance and defensive practices and think in long terms, we will not be able to solve these problems. Again, the second idea is learning to swim on the ethical flow. This is a term used by one of our interviewed people. I understand it like it follows. When we mix technology and society in our moment of digital capitalism, we produce some ethical messes, and we must realize and learn how to swim in this sea. I can give an example of what it means. For example, experts show that the public administrations have the duty and responsibility to ensure a digital sovereign, putting citizens' personal data from public services as far away from the big corporations as possible. We don't want the personal data of our children in the schools to go to some big companies that may save this data and do whatever they take. But at the same time, teachers and professionals, they want more easy access to tools. For example, in this case, the administration offers Moodle as a BLE, open source, it's open source, and we may control the data from students. But a lot of teachers prefer and want Google Classroom. Selecting the tool is a political decision. Sometimes the easy, fast technology is promoted by the big corporations. Sometimes the best technology is the worst by social and ethical implications. We must realize these implications. We must learn to swim on contradictions of this ethical flow. And the third idea is to start discussing the problems of vulnerable people with vulnerable people. We usually don't act don't reach these people. One of the experts interviewed explained the case of a migrated woman, saying that she was saying that her most important digital competence was learning to use Google Maps, because it meant for her that she could go to work any place inside the city and never be late. And that was a crucial point. And it was very useful to learn how to use Google Drive, because it meant that she could do the homework with her daughter, who lived in another country. So, what's happening? How to be less laser focused on these people? It takes a transversal effort. But we know that from the research methodology that there are a plethora of design thinking methodologies or experience or usability tests or journey narratives. We must use them. We must apply them in order to discuss the problems for vulnerable people with vulnerable people. Finally, what we think is that we need people like you, people wanting to put together all these different uses and views of technology, people not afraid of experimenting, people who come from very different fields, like this conference highlights, to work transversally with these problems. Thank you very much, and see you soon.